I only stopped by to drop off my spare keys, but walked into balloons, cake, and my dad yelling. She said yes. My brother held up a ring box. Then I saw her, my ex, wearing the watch I gave her. Dad grinned. We didn't think you'd mind. Then he added, oh, the catering's on your credit card. I didn't say a word. Just smiled, opened my banking app, canceled every transaction, and watched the party collapse before dessert was served. I, 32M, had been putting off returning my spare keys to my childhood home for weeks. The breakup with my ex 3 months ago had left me avoiding family gatherings, and honestly, I wasn't ready to face the questions or the pitying looks. But today felt different. Today I just wanted to get it over with, drop off the keys, maybe grab a beer with Dad, and head back to my apartment. I pulled into the driveway and immediately noticed something was off. There were extra cars parked along the street, and I could hear music and laughter coming from the backyard. My stomach dropped. Had I forgotten someone's birthday? Anniversary? I checked my phone, nothing on my calendar. Walking around to the back gate, I was hit with a wall of celebration. Colorful balloons bobbed in the afternoon breeze, tied to every chair and fence post. A massive cake sat on the patio table, pristine white frosting gleaming in the sunlight. Family members I hadn't seen in months were scattered across the yard, drinks in hand, all wearing the same excited, expectant expressions. Then I heard Dad's booming voice cut through the chatter. He was standing near the cake, his face flushed with joy, practically bouncing on his feet as he announced that she had said yes. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and I watched in confusion as my younger brother stepped forward, a velvet ring box held high above his head like a trophy. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. An engagement party. My brother's engagement party. When had he even been seriously dating anyone? The last I'd heard, he was still playing the field, going on casual dates here and there. But there he was, grinning ear to ear, accepting congratulations and backslaps from our uncles and cousins. That's when I saw her. She was standing next to my brother, her left hand extended as our aunt examined what I assumed was a new engagement ring. But it wasn't the ring that made my blood run cold. It was the watch on her wrist. My watch. The vintage Omega I'd saved for 6 months to buy her for our 2-year anniversary. The watch she'd claimed meant everything to her. The watch she'd worn every day until the morning she walked out of our shared apartment with 2 suitcases and a speech about needing space to find herself. My ex-girlfriend was engaged to my brother. The world seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the gate post to steady myself, watching as she threw her head back and laughed at something someone had said. She looked radiant, happy, more vibrant than I'd seen her in the last 6 months of our relationship, when she'd grown distant and irritable, always finding reasons to pick fights or stay late at work. Dad spotted me standing there, and his grin somehow managed to get even wider. He waved me over with the enthusiasm of a man who'd just won the lottery. As I approached on unsteady legs, he threw his arm around my shoulders and explained that they hadn't thought I'd mind. After all, she and I were over, and love was love, right? Besides, they'd been trying to keep it quiet until they were sure it was serious. The casual way he dismissed 3 years of my life, 3 years of thinking I'd found my person, made my chest tight. But what came next was the real kicker. Dad mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the catering was being charged to my credit card. He said it with a chuckle, like it was some sort of family joke I was supposed to be in on. I stood there absorbing this information. Not only had my family thrown an engagement party for my ex-girlfriend and my brother without telling me, but they'd also decided I should pay for it. The audacity was breathtaking. I thought about the months I'd spent wondering what I'd done wrong, replaying our relationship, analyzing every fight and misunderstanding. Meanwhile, she'd been seeing my brother. Looking around the party with fresh eyes, everything started to make sense. The timing of our breakup coincided with when my brother had started being mysteriously busy on weekends. The way she'd suddenly developed an interest in the gym where my brother worked as a trainer. How she'd begun asking casual questions about his schedule and interests during our last few weeks together. My family continued celebrating around me, oblivious to the storm building inside my head. Cousins congratulated me on gaining a sister-in-law, as if this was some normal, happy family moment instead of the most twisted betrayal I could imagine. My brother caught my eye from across the yard and had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but he didn't approach me. Neither did she. I excused myself to the bathroom, claiming I needed a moment to process the wonderful news. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bathtub and opened my banking app. The recent charges were all there: a catering company, a party supply store, even the bakery that had made the elaborate cake. Hundreds of dollars charged to my card without permission. My card that Dad had access to for emergencies, left over from when I was in college, and he helped with unexpected expenses. The audacity of using my money to celebrate my ex-girlfriend's engagement to my brother was almost laughable. Almost. If it weren't happening to me, I might have found the whole situation darkly comedic. Instead, I felt a cold fury settling in my chest, sharp and focused. I started with the catering company. A few taps on my phone, and I disputed the charge as unauthorized. The party supply store was next. Then the bakery. Each cancellation felt like a small victory. A tiny piece of control returned to me in a situation where I'd had none. But I wasn't done. Years of working in IT had taught me a few things about how payment processing worked. Most vendors, especially smaller ones hired for events, ran charges, but didn't always process them immediately. Some held authorizations for 24 to 48 hours before actually pulling the money. And if a payment was disputed quickly enough, especially with a good reason like unauthorized use, the vendors often found themselves scrambling to figure out alternative payment arrangements. I walked back outside wearing the biggest smile I could manage. Dad asked if I was feeling better, and I assured him I was just overwhelmed with happiness for the happy couple. The lie came easily, seasoned with just enough sincerity to be believable. The party continued around me for another hour. I made small talk with relatives, complimented the decorations, and even managed to congratulate my brother, though I couldn't bring myself to speak directly to her. Every time I looked at that watch on her wrist, my resolve strengthened. Then the catering manager appeared at the back gate, looking flustered and apologetic. She made a beeline for Dad, and I watched from across the yard as she explained there had been an issue with the payment. The credit card had been declined or disputed. She wasn't entirely sure which, but they needed alternative payment arrangements before they could serve the dinner portion of the meal. Dad's face cycled through confusion, embarrassment, and growing anger. He pulled out his wallet, but the catering manager explained the amount was beyond what they could process on a single personal card. They needed either the original payment method to work or multiple forms of payment to cover the balance. Within minutes, the party supply rental company's truck pulled up. They'd received similar payment issues and needed to discuss the return of their equipment. The domino effect was beautiful to watch. Dad frantically called my phone, and I let it go to voicemail before calling him back with feigned concern, asking what was wrong. He explained the payment problems, and I expressed shock and confusion. I told him I'd been having some fraudulent charges on my account lately and had to dispute several transactions with my bank. I promised to call them first thing Monday morning to sort everything out, but unfortunately, there was nothing I could do on a Saturday evening. The party began to unravel in real time. The catering staff started packing up the untouched dinner service. Relatives who had been expecting a full meal began to drift away, citing other commitments now that it seemed the celebration was winding down early. The rental company began deflating balloons and stacking chairs, apologetic but firm about their payment policies. My brother found me near the house, his earlier joy replaced with stress and embarrassment. He asked if there was anything I could do to help, maybe advance some cash or call my bank's emergency line. I told him I wished I could, but I'd already maxed out my other cards covering the fraudulent charges I'd been dealing with. The lie came smoothly, practiced now. She finally approached me as the yard emptied out. For the first time since I'd arrived, we were face to face. She thanked me for being so understanding about everything and apologized for the way things had ended between us. She hoped we could still be friends, especially now that we'd be family. I looked down at my watch on her wrist and asked if she was sure she wanted to keep wearing that, given how things had ended between us. She followed my gaze and her cheeks flushed red. She said she'd forgotten she was wearing it and started to take it off, but I stopped her. I told her to keep it. After all, she'd already proven she was good at taking things that belonged to me. The comment landed exactly as intended. Her face went pale, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But I wasn't done. I mentioned how funny it was that all these payment issues had started right around the time I'd been dealing with unauthorized charges on my account. Identity theft was such a problem these days. People using other people's credit cards without permission, that sort of thing. I wondered aloud if whoever had been using my card information realized it was actually a federal crime. The color drained from her face completely. My brother, who had been standing close enough to hear, looked between us with growing understanding. Dad, overhearing from where he was arguing with the catering manager, went silent. I explained that I'd had to report all the unauthorized charges to my bank, and they'd opened a fraud investigation. These things could take weeks to resolve, and in the meantime, any charges associated with the disputed transactions would remain frozen. I hoped everyone understood that my hands were tied until the investigation concluded. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad tried to salvage the situation, suggesting they could figure out payment later, but the vendors were having none of it. They'd been burned by disputed charges before, and without guaranteed payment, they were taking their services and equipment with them. I watched my family scramble to figure out an alternative while maintaining my expression of helpful concern. A few relatives offered to chip in for pizza or something simple, but the mood was ruined. The celebration had collapsed into an embarrassing scramble for damage control. As the last of the vendors packed up and the final relatives made their excuses to leave, I finally felt ready to go myself. I handed Dad the spare keys I'd originally come to return and mentioned that I should probably head home to deal with all this banking mess. He nodded absently, still looking shell-shocked by how quickly everything had fallen apart. My brother tried one more time to ask if there was anything I could do to help sort out the payment issues. I gave him my most sincere expression and promised I'd do everything I could to resolve the dispute with my bank. Of course, I'd have to be completely honest with them about how the charges ended up on my account in the first place. The implication hung heavy in the air. If I reported the charges as truly unauthorized, it wouldn't just be a billing dispute, it would be fraud charges against whoever had used my card without permission. Dad's face went ashen as the reality of the situation sank in. I left them standing in the wreckage of their celebration, surrounded by deflated balloons and the lingering smell of untouched cake. As I drove away, I felt lighter than I had in months. The betrayal still stung, and I knew the family drama was far from over. But for the first time since the breakup, I felt like I'd taken back some control. Update 1. The fallout was swift and brutal. By Sunday evening, my phone was buzzing with angry messages from family members who'd heard Dad's version of events. According to him, I'd sabotaged my brother's engagement party out of jealousy and spite. He'd conveniently left out the part about using my credit card without permission or the fact that my ex had been cheating on me with my own brother. Monday morning brought a call from Dad demanding I reverse the disputes and pay for the party. When I calmly explained that I couldn't dispute a legitimate fraud claim without potentially committing a crime myself, he became increasingly agitated. He threatened to cut me out of family events, holidays, even his will, if I didn't make this right. I let him vent before pointing out that using someone's credit card without permission was also a crime, one that I could pursue if I chose to. The line went quiet for a long moment before he hung up on me. My brother texted later that day, asking to meet for coffee. When I arrived at the cafe, he was already there, looking like he hadn't slept. He admitted that he and my ex had started their relationship before she'd officially broken up with me. He claimed it wasn't intentional, that they'd just connected while she was going through a rough patch with me, but things had escalated. I asked him directly when they'd first gotten together. After some evasion, he finally admitted they'd been seeing each other for the last 2 months of my relationship with her. Those late nights at the gym, the mysterious work events she couldn't skip, the growing distance between us, it all made sense now. He apologized and said he never meant for it to happen, but that he loved her and she loved him. He asked if there was any way we could work things out as a family. I told him that ship had sailed when he decided my girlfriend was worth more than our relationship as brothers. As for the party expenses, I suggested they take it up with their bank if they wanted to dispute my fraud claims. Update 2. 3 weeks later, the situation escalated beyond anything I'd expected. My ex showed up at my apartment, crying and desperate. She explained that the stress of everything had caused problems between her and my brother. The family was split down the middle, with some relatives supporting Dad's version of events and others quietly admitting I'd been wronged. But the real reason for her visit was more practical. The disputed charges had created a cascade of problems. The catering company was threatening small claims court for non-payment. The party rental company had reported the incident to their corporate office, and Dad's business had somehow gotten involved since he'd initially tried to resolve everything through his company connections. She begged me to call off the fraud investigation, saying she'd pay me back personally for everything. When I asked where she'd gotten the money, she admitted she'd been forced to sell some jewelry, including the engagement ring my brother had given her. Apparently, the stress of the whole situation had made her realize she wasn't ready for marriage, especially under these circumstances. I felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy, but then I noticed she was still wearing my watch. I pointed this out, and she looked down at it like she'd forgotten it was there. Again, she asked if I would consider dropping everything if she returned the watch and disappeared from my family's life entirely. She'd break up with my brother, move back to her hometown, and none of us would have to deal with this anymore. It was tempting, but something about the offer felt manipulative, like she was trying to make herself the martyr in a situation where she'd been the one cheating. I told her I'd think about it, but that the legal processes were already in motion and might not be easy to stop. This wasn't entirely true. I could have resolved everything with a few phone calls, but I wanted time to consider whether letting her off the hook was really justice or just enabling her behavior. Update 3. The final twist came from an unexpected source. My bank's fraud investigation had turned up something interesting. When they'd reviewed my account activity, they'd found evidence that my card information had been used for several smaller purchases over the past few months. Purchases I'd never noticed because they were small amounts at places I shopped regularly. Someone had been using my card information systematically, making small charges that would fly under the radar. The engagement party was just the largest and most obvious theft. When the bank traced the pattern, they found that most of the charges coincided with times when I'd left my wallet unattended around family members. But here's where it got really interesting. Some of the charges were from places my ex frequented, but others were from stores and restaurants my brother liked. They'd both been using my card information, probably sharing it between them, treating my bank account like their personal emergency fund. Armed with this information, I had a choice to make. I could let the bank's investigation proceed and watch both of them face potential criminal charges, or I could find another way to handle the situation. In the end, I chose a middle path. I agreed to resolve the party-related disputes in exchange for full repayment of all unauthorized charges over the past 6 months, with interest. I also required a written apology acknowledging what they'd done and a guarantee they'd stay away from me and any future family events I planned to attend. My brother tried to negotiate, claiming some of the charges were emergencies where he'd intended to pay me back. I reminded him that intention didn't matter when it came to theft, and that I was being more generous than either of them deserved. They agreed to my terms, but the family relationships were permanently altered. Dad never apologized for his role in the situation, though he stopped pressuring me to reconcile. Some relatives sided with me once the full story came out, while others maintained that families should stick together regardless of circumstances. The engagement was officially called off within a month. She did move back to her hometown, though I heard through family gossip that she and my brother tried to maintain a long-distance relationship for a while. It didn't last. As for my watch, I got it back, but I never wore it again. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded not just of the betrayal, but of how naive I'd been to trust the people closest to me. I eventually sold it and used the money for a weekend trip to clear my head and start planning what my life would look like going forward. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who know exactly where to aim for maximum damage. But it also showed me that I was stronger than I'd thought, and that standing up for myself, even against family, was worth the temporary pain of confrontation. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled things. They got a taste of the humiliation and helplessness they'd put me through, and I got my dignity back. Sometimes that's the best revenge of all.